Welcome to the Robert and Frances Fullerton Museum of Art's Art Hour podcast, the show where we talk about art, history, and everything between. I'm your host, Lana Klaib, and today we are joined by Chase Hanson and Professor Florencia San Martin, and we are going to be talking about the new art movement and what that would be and what that might look like. So before we get into the bulk of it, I'm going to go ahead and start with some simple introductions. So like I said, we have Professor Florencia San Martin. She is an assistant professor here at CSUSB, and she teaches art history and global cultures. She's also appeared in ASAP-J, I think that's how you say it, and then Latin America and Latinx visual culture and transmodernity. She has also appeared in a Journal of Peripheral Culture Production for the Luso-Hispanic worlds, and she is also working on 3 book projects. She is working on the Decolonial project of Alfredo Jar. She's also worked on an edited volume of the Contemporary Chilean Art and Culture and has also co-edited a volume of the Routledge Companion to Decolonizing Art History. So wow, pretty busy. And then we also have Chase, a familiar face. He is a fellow student assistant here at Raffma with me, and he's also a senior studying studio art and art history double major, as well as a minor in history, and you specialize in ceramics. So it seems like everyone here has been busy doing a lot of stuff.
Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, and thank you, both of you guys, for joining me. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So what I always like to do before we get into the bulk of, what is the new art movement, or, trying to, get into the bulk of the conversation, I think it's really important to contextualize where we are now. And I think that's what, a lot of art history is, looking at context and understanding where we are. So I think that, a good place to start is kind of talking about where we are now in history, I guess, what our arts world looks like now. So I guess we could start with you, Professor. So what are some current trends that you're seeing in art world in terms of, abstraction versus representation, things like that?
Well, thank you so much first for inviting me. Lena, she's my student in a course that I'm teaching now on the art of the Americas, and Chase was a wonderful student last year, also in the same course, Contemporary Art in the Americas. So thank you so much for the invitation, and congratulations for putting this show together.
Thank you.
It's super important, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. So today, right before coming here, I was teaching my MFA seminar on contemporary artistic practices, and we were reading at curators and art critics, thinking about the role of curators and the rise of biennials in the 90s and the 2000s. And it seems that today that's not the case. It seems that the biennial is not the only model of exhibition, that the figure of the curator, the super important and kind of prominent figure, has been replaced by the artists themselves, unlike collectives. So we were thinking about trying to think about different otherwise avenues that are resistant to the colonial model of art and art history. Um, so there are many. Like there is no one single movement or one single style that is prominent today, but many. Diversity and inclusion are being celebrated in museums, in more radical practices. But if there is one theoretical kind of framework that I've been working on, and I see that a lot of artists are working on, is that of decoloniality. So that book project that I'm working on now, alongside Tatiana Flores from Rutgers and Charlene Villaseñor Blanc from UCLA, we're trying to put together a number of essays by art historians and also some artists, thinking about visual culture, but also sonic culture and other kind of forms of representation. Trying not to think only about the fine arts in terms of the visual, but also in terms of tactility and senses and relationships. So thinking about art from a decolonial lens, in which subject matters and forms are always making visible the legacies of colonialism in our present. So that's an avenue of thinking, kind of theoretical framework of thinking that has been calling the attention not only of artists, but also curators, museums, collectives, and other art workers. Um, but also thinking about your question about figuration and abstraction, that's also something that is super important to think about today, right? Because abstraction has been disconnected to political and social issues because of the relevant because of the relevance of the abstract expressionist movement in the United States. But then, how abstraction can also be political, how abstraction can also kind of raise complicated issues related to gender, sexuality, and you name it. So I think that we are not recycling these terms and these movements and these aesthetics, but rethinking about them.
Mhm.
And reframing them in multiple ways, many times related to other things, which is something that is known as intersectionality. So abstraction in relationship to politics, in relationship to feminism. So in a more transdisciplinary world. I mean, you guys are expert in transdisciplinary worlds,
Right.
you know, history, art, or history, kinesiology, and art. So we live in a world, I believe, that is not focused in one single discipline, but you can really create projects that are dynamic if you put them together. I mean, you were talking about chemistry and how that can reframe notions of grouping, you know, movements um, to an expand to an ongoing and never-ended world.
Mhm.
I almost want to say the defining movement of our contemporary age is that there isn't one definable movement. You can't limit it down to one group of people with one philosophical like train of thought handed down from one teacher to the next. Art has become so democratized and decentralized. Ideas have become so decentralized. There's so many venues of publishing. As you said, the curator almost doesn't exist in many circumstances in places where the artist has completely subsumed them. That we just have such a proliferation of styles and ideas and a mixing of these styles and ideas that like where do you draw the line between we say this is the meme culture that's drawing influence from Dada and expressionism and surrealism elements, and where do we cross the line into like looking at entirely new genres that are evolving on the moment from the old. I just see such a blending of technology and art and of genres in between art in the contemporary age that kind of diversity in blending is that hallmark of the new movement to me, is that today's artists really take in absolutely everything. We don't limit ourselves to one movement or one style.
Awesome. So, Professor, you mentioned earlier this biennial. So I've heard that term, thrown around a lot. I think there's, some going on now, and then also in your class. So just that we can all have like the same understanding in case some of our viewers don't know what it is, maybe so you can help me understand a little more what it is. Do you want to kind of describe what that is?
Yes, of course. So the biennial is an event. The first art biennial was founded in the city of Venice in Italy in the late 19th century, and it's kind of the a big event, that an art event in which many countries are invited to participate. So there is one artist or a group of artists representing a country, and then there is, a contest, and then in the case of the Venice Biennial, like the best artist get this lion, golden lion, and then it's like the Olympic Games.
So like
It's
Olympics
very
for art.
competitive. It's very competitive, and the original, like the first one in Venice, in the late 19th century, was also created by following this kind of nation state politics, which is very 19th century. So one country competes to another country, and then there are two big pavilions, and in the city of Venice, kind of reviving Venice, right after centuries of being forgotten, with the, in the 19th century, in the 18th century, with the rise of France. And then the second biennial in the world happened in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, in the mid 20th century. So and then after, in the early 90s, there is this proliferation of biennials. So the biennial is an art event that happens every other year, but we also have triennials, like art event that kind of celebrates the culture of a city by inviting other artists from all over the world, and then to kind of create connections between local and international scenes. it's of course, I mean, we cannot really think about a biennial as something disconnected from the economy. It's like the Olympic Games or the World Cup, right? It's really good for the economy because there's a lot of tourism involved. Culture sells. And today there are biennials all over the world, in the most remote cities. If we think about remoteness in relationship to the West, but of course that's something that is a mistake. But there are multiple biennials today, and there's also a very important event, an art event that takes place every 4 years in Kassel, which is a city in Germany, which is perhaps the most important art event in the international context. We also have art fairs that are composed by different booths, right, of galleries, and it's the selling there or the economy there is more direct. But that doesn't mean that the biennial, at the heart of the biennial, we don't find that economic impulse of different countries and cities to show the world that they are capable of putting together this huge event, the Olympic Games again. But it's super interesting to think that the very second biennial in the world was in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, because Sao Paulo and Brazil in the mid 20th century was raising Sao Paulo as a metropolitan center, right? And you have the creation of Brasilia, which is this new city created from scratch by Niemeyer, an architect that was very influenced by the international style of Le Corbusier. So you have this kind of underdeveloped countries in the so-called third world, creating this event to tell the world that they are modern.
Right.
So there's always a political and economic kind of impulse behind this cultural event, which are very fun to go, but they are not just created for the sake of art. If we go back to art for the sake of art and the notion of the avant-garde. So these are art biennials that want to expose the particularities of cities, of different cities. So that's a biennial.
Cool. So thank you for helping me understand that. So I think going back to kind of what Chase said about how, there really isn't, one art movement, and kind of how you said, this intersectionality. One thing I've kind of seen, granted, I haven't been alive, in the 60s and all that, but, looking back at the trends and things like that, we kind of noticed that as time has gone on, it seems like artists have become more and more politically driven and more of like an activist. Do we see that trend continuing now? Like, are artists becoming even more politically driven, more, passionate about, their issues that they find passionate about, or have we kind of like hit a plateau and we're just kind of like coasting?
But is that the artists themselves, or is that kind of the people that we're categorizing as artists that we're evaluating on whether they're political or not? Because if you say that most artists are getting political, you're probably not thinking of when you scroll down your Tumblr feed and see 500,000 different individual, artisanal artists making little sticker designs or whatever. None of those are political in the slightest. So if we're going by numbers, it's going to be hard to say are most artists political. But at the same time, sure, you could say, everything in our world is getting more and more politicized. We look at the news and artists in the news, and sure, we could definitely draw a line through it and say it looks like things are getting more and more political by the day. I just caution against putting those as the same category, because like maybe the difference there is important. Maybe the difference there is the key.
What do you think of that, Professor?
Yeah, I think that so also in connection to what you were saying before about the kind of impossibility or the restrictions of thinking about kind of a linear history of art with a succession of different styles, because what we don't have in that kind of linear design of our history are all the other histories, all the other ways of understanding art in the world, which are not necessarily developed from Europe or from the United States, in which art didn't have the name art in the first place, right? So the political, I think, is also should not be kind of limited to parties and to like either socialist or more capitalist ideology, but also to issues related to the environment, to the what and how we eat, for instance, right? Um, to be more conscious. We were also talking about this with my grad students today, to have an ethical relationship to the world, right? To have a more conscious relationship to the world. So the political goes beyond this binary model of, in the case of the United States, being a Republican, being a Democrat. There are multiple gray zones, to quote Gandhi, right? So in non-Western societies, which is also a very complicated term to say non-Western, right? Why non-Western instead of, right, just their societies? The political is related to, for instance, the formation of communities, and how are those communities formed, or to the connection to the environment, the connection to water, the kind of non-hierarchy role of humans in the world. So many ways to see the political, and the first and perhaps the most important way to think beyond the political is by looking very critically at the notion of the nation state that is at stake in biennial, for instance. So why we need to have this competition between countries? Why there is an art that comes from one location? As you were saying before, there are many, a multiplicity of forms that are being created today. And we were talking today also about the work of Ana Mendieta.
Right.
So how kind of radical was in the 80s to do that kind of work, but then today there are more and more people denouncing violence towards women and women of color. So it is still not, it is a problem that is of course not solved, but there is more space today perhaps to denounce those things, but we know that we haven't yet achieved, right, the goal of finishing with discrimination and violence towards women. And Ana Mendieta was making that visible in the 70s.
Right.
So things have changed.
Yeah.
We don't know where we're going, but we know that there are more platforms for making visible these otherwise histories, these otherwise styles, these otherwise ways of thinking the political. And I think that we need to take advantage of that.
Ever more platforms. That's,
yes.
I like that way to say it. Like I was going to touch on kind of something you brushed on in there, in that whether or not the art is political too isn't in just the artwork itself. It's in how the artist is conceiving of it, how they're telling people about it and educating people about it, and how they're displaying it. The institution that you put the art in will affect whether or not the work is political or what that political message is saying or not. If you're giving a very anti-establishment political artistic message, it will probably undermine that to immediately turn around and sell it at Sotheby's for a few $1 million. And vice versa.
So this brings to mind, so when we look at the past at who was considered an artist, it was a person who had training, who had a patron pay for them to make a certain piece. It was very controlled about who got the spotlight, right? So looking at Renaissance, Michelangelo or Da Vinci, or things like that. And then it seems like as we've progressed to where we are today, it seems that maybe the changes are, at least from what I'm getting from what you two are saying, is that the changes that we see today aren't because the spotlight is moving, but maybe because the spotlight is growing, especially because, in today's society, we have, much more access to, internet, social media, anyone can become an artist, whatever that term means, and, kind of promote themselves and, kind of lead themselves into the spotlight versus, before having to find, a patron or things like that. So I guess this brings me to, my next question is, talking about the past, we had, these centers of culture, like these centers of art, before it was, maybe Italy with, Florence, or what are the ones, Milan or Rome, or, places like that. And then maybe it moved to Paris, and then it moved to New York. Do we still see things like that today, or has it, have multiple popped out, or has, the importance faded, or what's kind of going on with that geographically?
Super interesting. These are all things that we are working with the grad students.
Okay.
So the model of center periphery is a model that is very complicated and very problematic, because to think about one center and multiple peripheries is to continue or kind of celebrating the model of colonialism, in which there is one center in which everything happens, and then there are all these kind of orbits around that center. If we think about just a multiplicity of forms that are taking place in the world, maybe at the same time, but thinking about time very differently. So they're all happening in the same decade, which is also kind of problematic to think about. Well, but they are thinking about time and temporalities in quite different ways, right? So space and time are all conceived very differently. So then we should not think about the center periphery model, which was a model that was very that was used a lot by Latin American critical thinkers in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, such as, Nelly Richard and Ticio Escobar. But it's a model that, while the intentions of these critics, of course, a good intention, is a model that repeat the canon of thinking about the West and its others.
Mm-hmm.
So if the history of Western art, begins in Greece and ends in New York, slash Beijing, slash Hong Kong, right, slash Milan, slash Berlin, there are many other histories.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why histories should not be written with a capital H, and should be also should include an S at the end,
Mm-hmm.
because of the plurality of history. So I think that the model of center periphery is not it's complicated, as well as the model of the West and its others, or referring to non-Western cultures. So there's a lot of work to do when it comes to language, vocabulary. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's that trying to look at those kind of models just reveals the point of view of whoever is trying to construct the model, and doesn't necessarily tell much about what they're trying to reveal. Because, like, even within the set of establishment institutional histories with a capital H, you immediately find ones that start to break down around that traditional narrative of what South Europe to Paris to New York kind of
Definitely.
thing. Like, just within, say, ceramic art, that's not where any of those places are. Through the 19th century, it's Britain. Through the 20th century, it moves over to the Midwest of America, and then by late 20th century, it's here in California in the arts and crafts movement. And none of those line up with any of the traditional art hubs of that time, and yet it's still a traditional art. And if you go into any given discipline, you'll find the simple cut and dry narrative isn't what the actual history of any discipline is, even if you're going to, again, take that point of view of looking at it as a discipline with a history. It's very easy to find many centers, to find many peripheries, and it just depends on how you're evaluating how the art is spreading from that center to that periphery.
Yeah, I think that, and you were mentioning before the notion of geography, which is also something that we're working with the grad students. So, to what extent geography should, to what extent we should think about the kind of pivotal role of geography in artistic practices? Thinking about locality, thinking about creating forms and modes of representation from the corners of society, from the borders of society. There is well, I think there's I already mentioned decolonial theory, but and of course here in Southern California, it's super important as well, or has been very important as well. Artists working from the border, from the literal and also the symbolical border. We have a professor here, Ed Gomez, in his biennial, that regards issues of the border, and a lot of Chicana writers, Lawrence Saldúa are thinking from the border. So the border, the notion of the border, the notion, and then if you think about the Caribbean, the notion of the archipelago, allowed us to think beyond, right, those kind of strict geographies. And that is a model that think about geography from an aesthetics that is cultural, instead of kind of mathematical principle that is fixed. And that should be, and I think that, I think that that's a kind of a mode, or a topic that is calling the attention of a lot of artists today, that are running from that division between that dialogue between center and periphery, which was super important in the 20th century. If you think about Torre Garcia, for instance, Joaquin Torre Garcia, an artist from Uruguay, who inverted the map of the Americas. He wrote the super famous, one of his most famous work. He was, champion in abstraction in Latin America, but trying to think about abstraction in relationship to native cultures in the Americas. So he simply shifted the map and he said, our north is your south, our south is your north. So we are the north, not because we're in the south, we are the north, but in inverting the map, he is taking the place of the north. And why, right? You need that kind of binary model, because in inverting the map, the position is inverted but not reconfigured within the kind of optional understanding of multiple positions.
Right. And that's interesting because, like, when you think of a map, like, there's no reason why our maps should look like that. Like, I think, the reason that we look at, the way that our map looks today, Europe is in the center because, it was Europeans who, were the cartographers, at least for the map that we use today. And it's interesting that, the way we have our map drawn out is very Eurocentric because, Europe is top and center. And it's interesting because we could shift the map easily. We can have Europe on the edge and then, the Atlantic in the middle and then Pacific in the middle. Yeah. I'm mixing my maps, but it's interesting because, the way our maps are drawn, again, I guess it ties to that idea of like colonialism.
So so the ways maps are drawn are projections in images about notions of how you are located in the world. And there are multiple artists, and like Mona Hatoum, we were talking about her as well, an artist originally from Palestine who had to exile in London, and she's been working with that idea of the map and deconstructing and kind of mobilizing that very fixed idea of a north and a south and a east and a west that are ideas. These are all ideas that are materialized in images and then reproduced into infinity in our imagination, in TV programs, in educational systems, and so on and so on. So that's also super interesting, the notion of geography, I think, something that artists have been working on in many different levels, like the level of the visual, the level of the symbolical, the level of the methodological.
Awesome. So kind of shifting gears a little bit here, when we look at the past of, what was considered art, I guess, within the, the Western idea of it, we have, painting and sculpture and things like that. And, as we move forward in society, we've shifted away from that in a way, I think. And, today we've come to a day where it seems like anything goes with art. I was doing some research on, some art, and, we have, a piece that sold for, I don't know, thousands or even millions of dollars for just a banana duct taped to a wall, or, invisible sculptures, or, we have Jeff Koons, I feel like we reference him in every single podcast, making, giant balloon animals. And so, a lot of people say, like, art is strange and wacky, artists are, off doing their own thing. I guess this is a two-part question is art really wacky and out there, or maybe like there's just some higher level of thinking needed to understand it? And so that's the first part. And then the second part is, do you see art continuing down that path, or do you think that we're going to go to more traditional forms of art?
What do you think? Or how are you?
I don't know. I feel like at least for the
Yes.
I do definitely think that art is, I guess, wacky. I mean, you have invisible sculptures that are selling for thousands of dollars, and part of you thinks, is it really because it's so intellectually important that it needs to sell for that much, or part of you thinks, oh, maybe it's for like taxes, or ways of moving money around. So I do think that a lot of art has kind of gone down the rabbit hole in a way. I do think that maybe in some areas it is good because maybe it brings light to new issues, or we see art in a different way, so we're not as close-minded. But at the same time, like, it's a banana taped to a wall. Like, what is this cultural significance, or the political significance or social significance of a banana taped to a wall? And I do think that the general public, I feel like, dictates a lot of what's popular, because I guess we're the consumer if you're looking at it from like a capitalist point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So in my personal opinion, I do feel like maybe in the future we might kind of step away from, I guess, the absurdity that sometimes comes with art and kind of take a step back. At least that's what I think might happen. But I am interested to see your guys' perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Chase?
oh, to eliminate a brief and very, very different perspective, art exists outside of the fine art world.
Right.
And if we were to look at art as a whole, we would see that art as a whole has become more consumerist, more dollar focused, and more unarty, I'd almost want to say, than
Right.
ever. If you look at by raw numbers of dollars value, where are dollars in the art world flowing? They're not flowing to fine art. They're flowing towards computer art, graphic art. They're flowing towards things. We've invented ways over the past 20 or 30 years for art to be redistributed and copied in ways that have never been before feasible.
Mm-hmm.
And so our corporations are finding ways to work this into everything. Our video games and our movies and our books and our comic books and our everything is just getting more and more and more art than ever. And we're getting more culture and more media than ever. And those dollars are going up. You might almost say that as a whole, art is becoming more consumerist by far. It's coming away from the realm of fine art, and it's becoming in the realm where we simply buy artists by the bucketful to throw them at a movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but as for fine art, that's a whole different question,
Okay.
because you might almost define wackiness as being against the rules, against the
Mhm.
norm, and as the art world develops, we get more rules, we get more norms, so there's more room for us to break them. I
Mhm.
say with more rules, we can break them even further. We can go even further out there. We can get even wackier.
Wow. Even wackier than a banana duct taped to a wall.
Exactly, because that wouldn't have been possible 200 years ago. Would
Right.
it have been? We're getting wackier, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I'm not very versed in the art market because this profession, this passion, which is art, has many different venues. The art market is only one, but there are
Right.
many others. Yes, of course, that example, it couldn't be more radical when it comes to what is art today, where people is spending all this money. But when we think, so that's what we're thinking today, and of course that I'm not celebrating Hirsch or Catalan,
Mhm.
but when Duchamp made his famous urinal,
Right.
right? Fontaine, he titled that, and then he put his signature, but with another name
Mhm.
that was not his name. He said, "This is art." It was a scandal,
Right.
and it wasn't even accepted at the Armory show in the early 20th century. And then we all only know about it because Stiglitz, the famous photographer, modern photographer, photographed the ready-made, and now it's a ready-made. And maybe Catalan is also thinking about his work as ready-made, like contemporary ready-made. And that follows that tradition, that kind of um, that understanding of art, which is only one out of many.
Mhm.
The development of the ready-made, and then the relationship between market and art. If we think about the problem of the concept of art, as I always love to quote that essay from Caroline Dean, that in many cultures, art was never thought as an aesthetic form or as something to be exhibited and eventually, bought by someone or collected. Art sometimes has a spiritual function, a social function, a political function. And then there are other spaces for intersection and interaction there as well. So I think that example is an example that regards one kind of art world. But there are many art worlds. And I think that it's a very problematic example, of course. And of course, the attention of the media was very, I mean, it was too much. Because also that sells, right? The
Right.
very way in which that thing circulated in the media sells, and that was at stake in Andy Warhol's right art. things happen in the media. And that's the fascination of our consumer culture, to see, to eat from the media, and now from social media. Yeah.
I kind of made a point similar to that when we were talking about a different artwork, in a different session where it's a non-artwork. There's no artwork. It's basically a space where the artist tells you how to exhibit this invisible and empty artwork. And the point I made was the artwork isn't in that space. The artwork is what's being done in the media when we're reading it, when we're learning about it, when we're thinking about that. We go, we're reflecting on where is that object located in the context of the museum, and that is the art, is us reflecting on it and kind of our impression of it.
And that's why it's interesting to think about in Argentina, in the 70s, when artists were operating under the umbrella of conceptualismo, which is different than conceptual art. There were artists creating happenings and publishing these happenings in the media, but happenings that never really happened. So the media is the public space. Not because it's something printed in this three-dimensional surface. It's not part of the public space, because we can access to the media. It's part of the world in which we inhabit, and it's public. I mean, of course, you have to pay a few dollars, for the New York Times, the LA Times, and you name it. But or you don't have to pay nothing to see things online. But the media, Chomsky and a lot of intellectuals argue it's part of the public space. So you can create works in the public space of the media that are not necessarily happening in the public space of a gallery or a park. And the work exists in that circulation. And not because it didn't happen means that the work didn't exist. That's the work media. And it's also important, you were before talking about trying to think about art beyond the object. And that's also super important. It's not just the object and its meaning, but also who is the artist? Where is the artist exhibiting? How is the artist relating to other people? Like the ethic component of the artist and her, they, or his ways of relating an environment. So not just the banana, but then all that world informing that image. And I think that that's important, because art history is a discipline that used to be very, and it's still very, the traditional kind of branch of art history is very still object based. So let's analyze an object for a year, the same object. And it's super, it's important, it's an important task. But then there's all these other tasks that needs to be, that are making that object even possible in the first place. And the object is not the most important thing. That's why a lot of artists, such as, for instance, Diego in Venezuela, was focusing more in the process instead of the product.
So it seems like, our art isn't necessarily the end product, it's everything that's also surrounding it too, right? And I think, Chase, you were going to say something.
Yeah, in ceramic art, we don't just have the focus on the process too, we have the focus on everything around the process. When we fire art, it isn't just we have some chump intern that we don't like go do it really quick over the weekend, and then we come back and celebrate afterwards. It's a party that everybody comes together to do all weekend. It's an experience, it's an event, and the process of firing it as everybody comes together, sure, you might say that's part of the art itself. It certainly has a lot of impact on the final product. Yeah.
But networks, right? Networks of interaction, who is publishing where, venues of exhibiting that are inside but also beyond the museum and the gallery. So these are also things that are important within not only art making, but also thinking about art context.
So I do want to, bring up a new, I guess, topic to discuss, and that is technology, because we can all agree that technology has played a huge influence on our society today, and it arguably has made, our society today what it is. And I think that, the art world has definitely changed because of technology too. And, it brings my mind back to, when we look at, how art has changed because of technology, my mind goes back to when, photography was first developed. And, a lot of people were saying that, this is the end of painting. Because why would you need to make a painting when, you could take a photo? but really it just allowed, painters to kind of explore new areas. They didn't have to do portraits anymore because you have a camera to do that, so you can focus on other things.
Just like look at our demographics in the building. We have like half of the building are traditional studio arts majors, half of them are visual design, graphics arts, computer majors. A whole bunch of
Right.
them are working like me in other 3D media, and we have everything in between.
So do you think that, maybe that technology has allowed for even more fields, more exploration, more concepts and more, issues to be brought up? Or do we also see it as kind of like the death of traditional art?
No, the first one.
The first one?
Yeah, I remember Susan Sontag. She was she was a writer, and she wrote about literature, but she also wrote a lot about photography. So she has a very famous book titled On Photography. She died of cancer. She also wrote about disease and cancer. One of my favorite writers, super interesting writer. And when she was, in the hospital getting the treatment for cancer, she was like, I'm taking advantage of the computer. I'm taking advantage of the computer, of being able to write in this keyboard, but I'm not kind of exceeding those advantages to get lost in the world of exploration, to navigate in the internet, because so you can take advantage of new media, of new technologies, and you can also work with the new technology, I believe, but then know the limit of when you will pass that kind of the when that will turn into the abusing of what that technology can give you. So that's Susan Sontag talking about the computer. And then with photography, super interesting, because when it was created, you have people such as Charles Baudelaire, this modern poet per excellence, walking the streets of Paris, smoking a cigarette, drinking wine, and saying, no, with photography, we have the end of painting. So we need to be very careful here, because photography should be the servant, he said. And I'm quoting, the servant of the arts. You need to use photography to photograph, to document the arts. And of course, that he was wrong, because with photography, you can talk about images and images, right? Images. Images are representations of the world, and this is Plato, right? So I think that it's important to take advantage of technology, of the tools of technology, but never forget also other media. I don't think that there are some medias that are more important than others. Painting is not important than sculpture. Sculpture is not more important than drawing, engraving, photography, performance, action, the newspaper, speaking, poetry, a form of speech, relating, cooking together, like things. But try not to, kind of lose yourself in the infinity possibilities of navigation.
Super interesting.
Yeah. To me, it's not like a bad thing or anything that you have to know your limits and limitations of each medium. To me, that's the most amazing and exciting thing in the world. As we develop and discover these new mediums, we find new formats with new sets of limitations, new places where they're strong, and sure, they have different places where they're weak, but with more formats, more mediums, more technologies, we find new ways to combine them to create entirely new mediums out of the intersections between these new technologies we're creating. Or even if we can't directly combine things, there's always so much we can take from one discipline and bring it to another discipline, even without physically joining them together, so to speak.
And also is the world that we are living in. So if art is this portrait of the world, of critical relationships that happen in the world. Not the window of the world, right? Not the kind of linear perspective that allowed us to see the world as a window of the world. But if art is this kind of critical portrait of complex problems in the world, then technology inhabits that world and makes the production of images very complicated in a very interesting way, right? So that's what the picture generation artists were doing in the 80s, right? Barbara Cindy Sherman, Richard Prince, who were rephotographing photographs of photographers and appropriating the photographs to kind of say this is the capacity of conceptual photography to talent images and to show the kind of reproduction of images in our contemporary world, and that's the 80s. So why fearing new media, new technology, if that's also reshaping always, refreshing always the world, right? And images that inhabit the world.
Awesome. So we are kind of,
Mhm.
getting towards the end of it. So I do have, I guess, one last question. I think this, at least for me, it seems like the hardest question. So, when we look at, where we are in today's world, I think we kind of said anything kind of goes for art. There's so many different mediums, so many different ways that you can combine mediums or fields or, just different things in general. So I guess my question is, and whoever wants to answer this first can go ahead and go first. Is there anything left to explore or have we already done everything?
Mm.
And, whoever wants to tackle that first, you can go ahead.
I always believe there's more to explore.
There's more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely more.
Like, there's not just more to explore. We don't even know like where to find more to explore, and we're still finding out where to find more to more to explore. Just
Yeah.
it folds out.
There is this scholar Fukuyama. He wrote a very famous book on the end of history. So the history, has ended already. He wrote, a few decades ago because of I keep thinking about the kind of triumph of capitalism, and that there's no more beyond that, right? But thinking about and I think that this may be also a very important framework that a lot of artists are using, the notion of decolonial futurisms. So thinking about reshaping the past in our imagination in order to think about otherwise futures. So the notion of Black futurism, for instance, of brown futurism, science fiction in the work of a lot of writers is something that is very rich today because it opens those possibilities to the construction of otherwise futures and futurism. So reading, for instance, The Comet, right? That's super interesting short story about Du Bois, in which he writes about this comet that hit New York, and then there's only one person alive. He's a black man, and then he finds another person alive with a white woman, and then there's this possibility to reconstruct a world without racial discrimination. But then in the story of Du Bois, the woman found her fiance alive in the ruins of New York, and then she decided to continue her life with her white fiance. So it's a story that is a science fiction story by a sociologist and a very important writer and thinker, Du Bois, in the 30s, that allowed us to think today about the possibility of thinking differently, but the fact that the present is still dealing with all these problems. So I think that yes, there are many possibilities, and people working through the lens of decolonial futurisms are for instance, what's the in 94 in Mexico, there's the formation of this group, right, that are telling the world that they actually won in Mexico the battle against those discriminating native peoples, but they didn't. But in believing that they did, they're changing the present. They're changing the idea of the past in order to be able to create otherwise futures. So yes, I think the future is the thing.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. I really enjoyed our discussion. Thank you to all the viewers who stayed this long. So thank you for watching. And if I'm going to do the classic YouTube closing now. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed what you watched. Thank you again for both of you guys for joining me, and hope everyone has a good day.
Thank
So
you
Thank
for
you.
the invitation.
Thank you. Bye.